Hello and welcome to Tripadvisor Talk. This is a regular panel discussion show we put together to bring together leaders in hospitality, tourism, and travel. I'm very lucky today to be joined with four expert restaurateurs who have made their mark around the world. First, I'd like to introduce Mr. Ben Liebman, the Chief Operating Officer of Noma, Mr. Richard Corain, the Chief of Staff of Union Square Hospitality Group in the U.S., Mr. Indra Cantano, the co-founder and director of the Jigger and Pony Group, whose flagship bar, Jigger and Pony, just became awarded as Asia's best bar, and Ms. Karina Bajaj, who is the executive director of KA Hospitality in Mumbai, that runs some of the best restaurants in India. Thank you so much for joining me today. Let's start with a simple question that goes back a little bit over the last few months. Were there any early warning signs about what was to happen in terms of the pandemic? And did you guys have any crisis plans in effect that you could activate when things looked like it was going to get bad?
So I'll start.
Let's start with Karina.
India actually went into lockdown very early on when we were showing few signs. And as a restaurant industry, we had taken a call to shut even before the official announcement was made. Obviously in terms of the interest of our team and our guests. And since we operate brands in India which have an international presence, so Hakkasan, Yawacha, or Nara, we had already started conversations with our partners to develop an SOP in terms of safety and assurance, and had kind of extended that to our homegrown brands as well before we went into lockdown. So I think we kind of got that advantage, luckily. And also from a business perspective, we had to think of different ways, and we had to actually pivot and look at like certain brands like Hakkasan, which is luxury and now almost 20 years old globally. We had to launch Delivery, which was crazy for us, and also look at different business verticals. So in terms of a crisis plan, that's what we had to kind of go to.
Yeah, for us here in Singapore, we had the fortune of being quite well connected with China and with North Asia. So we started seeing the first signs early on in January, even before Chinese New Year, when the news started coming out of China, and there were a few of the imported cases coming into Singapore from Wuhan. And I think that's when we first get the idea that this might spread around Asia. Singapore handled it pretty well at the beginning, but it was pretty clear very soon when we see the cancellations in our restaurants for events, for travels, corporate travels all around the region, that this is going to be something different. And I think that then follow on with the lockdowns, or as we call it here in Singapore, the circuit breaker, that first started with bars and nightclubs at the end of March, around March 27th, if I'm correct. And then that continues into all the restaurants are closed for dine-in as of April 7th. The restaurants have finally reopened about a couple of weeks ago, so about 11, 12 weeks. But bars, our bar, Jigger and Pony, has been closed now for about 3 months.
Richard, you operate a lot of restaurants in the United States. Did you guys have any kind of plan that could accommodate for what happened?
Well, the answer is no, because nobody was sure what was happening in any great detail. But, as I recall it, and, it's been 3+ months now, and many of these days just run together in my mind. But there were two major events, three really, that got our attention. Number one, there's a high-profile chef in Seattle named Tom Douglas, who has quite an enterprise in Seattle. And I'm thinking it was the first week of March that we all read that he made an instant decision to shutter all of his restaurants. And this was when Seattle was sort of the hot spot before anywhere else, and immediately move all of his employees to unemployment. And I remember sitting around the office going, wow, this guy's really, this seems to be something serious. Who would close all of their businesses in the space of one day and lay every employee off? And as we started to read more about it, it was, well, number one, he wasn't forecasting any revenue coming in because obviously the health crisis had reached Seattle. And number two, the most humane thing and caring thing he could do for his employees was get them to unemployment so they would have some income. So what seemed to be a crazy, just knee-jerk reaction actually seemed quite wise as we started to explore it. The second thing, which was, I think, the biggest wake-up call, perhaps in the U.S., the National Basketball Association canceled their entire season one night right before a game was about to start and said, that's it for the whole year. That's when, for us, we said there's something really serious going on here. If an enterprise, a global enterprise like the NBA could cancel their entire season on a moment's notice, they obviously foresee something coming that's pretty important. And then the third thing was we had a guest that tested positive for COVID back in the first week of March, and we had learned about it. And we immediately shut down that restaurant that day and deep cleaned it because we thought that was the wise thing to do. And this was way before, people started becoming at alarming rates. And the same thing happened that didn't test positive but had flu-like symptoms in another business. So we did the same thing. So we lost 2 nights of revenue by deep cleaning both of these businesses. And then as events started to unfold, we came down on one decision which has stayed in place for us till this call today, which is until we can guarantee the safety of our staff and our guests, we have to shut down. And so as things have loosened a bit, we've gone into takeout and delivery. But we've stayed on the side of safety since we made that decision.
I guess that leaves me as the last storyteller. We started seeing signals of perhaps what was coming to Europe initially through our connections through Asia, both with respect to our guests and our interest in a restaurant that we have in Tokyo, a partnership out of Tokyo. And to some degree, it was almost as if you could hear the drum beats getting louder as they started making their way to Europe. Of course, we could see what was happening in Italy, what was happening in Spain. But really, I think much like Richard, I'll never forget certain dates or certain kind of milestones. The first was when the United States shut down travel between the US and Europe. That was if we weren't already on top of strategizing where the business was going to go, that was certainly a major one because so many of our guests come from the US. The second was maybe 48 hours later when the Danish government shut the borders. And then we as Noma closed maybe 36 hours after that. We did a lunch service on a Saturday and that was our final service. Renee, Peter Kreiner, our group CEO, our CFO, our GM at Noma, I think we had been looking at spreadsheets and modeling quite, obsessively, of course, for the previous weeks leading up into that point. But it was at that point that we knew that as a business, we needed to close. The rest of our restaurants within our little family closed maybe within 72 hours after that. And pretty much by that point, that was when the government went into shutdown mode. The Danish experience has been somewhat different to that which we've observed, say, out of the US or Australia, where I'm originally from, or the UK. Effectively, it was a shutdown of society, a shutdown of the economy. There was no lock-in, however. The Danes and residents were still able to go out and leave their homes, but all restaurants, bars, cafes, cultural institutions, everything that you could imagine could be closed was closed. The other thing that certainly influenced our strategy, both in the short, medium, and to some degree even the long term, was the speed with which the government acted. The Danish government moved very quickly to contain the outbreak. I think as of today, there's maybe been 12,500 cases total, maybe about 620 deaths. The reality is that any loss of life is significant, but for a country of 5.5 million people, that's quite low. So they did get ahead of the curve very quickly, building themselves as long a runway as they could to prepare for whatever might come. But they also moved very quickly to support the economy and to support community. Across the board, all industries, not just hospitality, obviously that's the focus of our conversation today, they stepped in with pretty significant, pretty extraordinary care packages that allowed companies to claim up to 100% of their fixed costs, up to 85, 90% of their salary costs. Now that was capped. And that, coupled by what Renee referred to as survival mode, which meant salary cuts from the top. You know, Renee and Peter have not taken a salary. Everybody else has taken very significant pay cuts. What that allowed us to do, and that was very much the government's ambition, was to keep people together. We had the fortune of being able to keep all of our staff together. Thankfully, nobody was let off. And again, that is in no small part linked to the speed and the I guess the breadth of support that the government took. We are now emerging from the last 3.5 months. Restaurants were allowed to reopen 6 weeks ago. Schools went back 7 to 8 weeks ago. Businesses, in terms of people returning to offices, retail, cultural institutions like galleries, museums, all of that has opened. So far, we are seeing, of course, we're seeing some increase, and that's to be expected, but we are seeing some positive signs, both with respect to, again, the government's ability to contain it. Of course, we see, and we don't take for granted, but, some of the experiences in other countries where they've seen quite significant spikes as they've reopened. We, touch wood, have not experienced that yet. But we're also seeing some positivity as it relates to consumer sentiment and hope as it relates to people wanting to return to their lives. I don't want to say return to normalcy because I don't think that exists anymore, but kind of return to their lives. We have a very long road ahead, but there's hope.
I'd love to focus on that last bit a bit and ask for, especially for all of you, this idea of being forced to pivot your businesses, to embrace technology more, to go into to do delivery-only platforms. I think for a lot of consumers, they don't know how difficult that might be for restaurateurs. Can you talk about just the challenges and the processes of pivoting to these kinds of new ways of doing business for F&B? Indra, do you want to go first? Talk about
Sure.
Cocktail delivery, since you brought it up.
Sure. Cocktail delivery is something we've never seen done anywhere else. And I think in the early days of lockdown, I started looking into and calling all of my peers in China, in Indonesia, and in many markets to see, are you able to do cocktail deliveries? What is it like? We started doing cocktail deliveries in vacuum-packed pouches. Every restaurant has a vacuum-packed machine, and we have a lot of these plastic pouches around. And the reason why we did that instead of bottling our cocktails was pretty simple. The city was going into a lockdown, and we couldn't find bottles. And a lot of our suppliers, where we would order bottles, they would say, well, we get our bottles from China. You can place an indent order. It will take 60 days. I was like, well, in 60 days, we'll be out of business. So we started with this cocktail pouches. We vacuum-packed that together with our garnishes. And surprise, people really like it. The visual appeal of it, and the fact that, this is the only option available if they still want to get ready access to good alcohol. And they started ordering that. And for the first 10 weeks, we were in lockdown for 12 weeks, but for the first 10 weeks of that, we saw an increasing revenue week by week on our cocktail delivery and on our food delivery. So that's something that we really had to pivot in terms of creating new products together with our team. But I think more importantly is we started to realize that what we have to do is to really continue delivering that human connection. People go to bars to meet with other friends. People go to bars to meet the bartenders and have a conversation and have a merry time. So we started to try to look for small nuggets where we can, play a role in this. So we started handwriting notes. When we do get a small batch of bottles to start bottling our cocktail, we started hand drawing the labels one by one, just because we feel it feels a little bit more connection with the guests. And we also do see the rise of gifting, where a lot of people are having a tough time working from home or tutoring their kids at home, and they want to send a gift to their friends or to their loved ones that they cannot otherwise see. So I think it's been overall a very interesting experience, but we learned so much in 10 or 12 weeks that we could not have imagined before.
Richard, you have so many restaurants in your group.
Mm-hmm.
What was it like transitioning for you guys to a delivery sort of only world?
Well, it was very slow because, as I said in the beginning, we immediately shut down because of safety. So if we were going to get into the delivery business, two things needed to happen. It needed to be safe, and it needed to be a business model that was sustainable. And if you bear in mind that New York City has 20,000 restaurants, 30,000 if you count pizza parlors, everybody that could had an immediate rush into takeout and delivery. So the market was saturated with everybody trying to do that because that was the only avenue they could explore. We also found that the amount of labor and product cost versus sales did not always equate to a business model that was sustainable. And in those cases, we chose to just keep pressing pause because we couldn't lose money. But there was one avenue that has done pretty well, which is, I don't know if everyone is familiar with an online marketplace called Goldbelly, which is a shipping marketplace that has specific items from iconic businesses across America that are shipped to your door from that business. So we chose to dive deep into Goldbelly and ship items across the country, because New York City was not the only place that was in lockdown, and people still wanted really good food delivered to their door. So that's been a very good avenue for us, and I think a lot of others as well, because it just, the sustainable business model of opening just for takeout and assuming people leave their apartments, or having enough delivery people to get the orders where they needed to go in an efficient manner, just didn't line up for us immediately. As it's starting to reemerge now, the opportunities are a little better because people are more mobile and the weather's better. So we've seen a definite uptick in people coming to get their things, maybe standing out on the sidewalk once they do, trying to socialize in a socially distant manner. So it's getting a little better, and we're looking at how we can expand that as well.
Karina, what did your group do?
So we've actually looked at how we can make things more efficient in terms of looking at upgrading our systems. We also took it into our own hands and launched our own delivery website, effectively cutting out the aggregators from that, which will in the long run put back that money into the system. We also had to look at many different things in terms of changing, I think, our mindset overall, because we had a very kind of straight mindset of we wouldn't deliver our dim sum, for example, in Yawacha. And we had to relook at that model, which before it didn't really seem as efficient, but we realized that we can do it more effectively. We also try to keep, like, just going on from what Indra said, we try to keep the fun element part of the entire experience and look at delivering, whether it was like our pasta kits or doing different cocktail premixes that we could deliver to multiple people. We also looked at different Zoom parties or weddings or different things that we actually cater to, and to bring that like joy back into hospitality, because as Richard said, it's not just about delivering the food to the person's home. It's about so much more. So we try to look at different and additional business verticals, and I think that what's great about it is that will always stay. So even when we eventually go into our new normal of dining, that will still kind of continue to give us the returns that we've worked on today.
Ben, I wanted to ask you, you guys probably had one of the most famous pivots that anyone's seen in the F&B industry, transforming Noma into a burger bar. Can you talk us through the conversations that led to that? And did you guys do anything in between that was also an interesting pivot leading up to that?
So let's come to that. Let's come to the burger and wine bar in a minute. As Noma, no, there was no interim pivot whilst we were all in that kind of shutdown mode that had been mandated across the industry. I think much like Richard, some of the other businesses that we're involved in, partnerships that we have with some of our former chefs, faced similar challenges. I think perhaps in part also given the dynamic of the market. Again, remembering people could leave their homes. Essential food businesses, supermarkets, butchers, greengrocers, fishmongers, they were still open. So people could still go get produce to come home and cook. But I think to Richard's point, it's hard to pivot to a delivery business when you're not set up from that. And most of the restaurants that we're set up with were never imagined to be delivery or takeaway, whether that be in a positioning or the experience or the type of food. That said, to Indra's point, one of the businesses that we're involved in is a bakery with the former head baker at Tartine, and he was allowed to stay open the entire time. And, business was good. It justified staying open. But I remember having a conversation with Richard Hart soon after, that decision to remain open. And I said, the value that you are generating is something that you'll never really recognize, which is the value to the community. You were staying open. You were delivering, and that was one business where we did introduce delivery. So both delivery in the literal, but also in the figurative. You were delivering comfort in a difficult time, and you were giving positivity back to the community. And for a business that is still less than 2 years old, I said you are going to graft yourself onto this local community because you stayed open and you were there for them. So I think Indra's point is true. We are ultimately in the service, the hospitality, the experience business, and being able to deliver that comfort to people at a time when so many of them were facing and continue to face uncertainty. I think that's the one thing is, whilst we've reopened as an industry, none of us know what happens when the government packages end. None of us know what happens if there is a spike. None of us know if tourists don't come back. Borders are reopening across Europe, but what does that really mean? None of us are going to know. So, grafting yourself onto a local community and being that kind of local favorite is paramount. And that kind of the segue on to your question about Noma was part of the thinking of doing what we were going, this idea of a burger and wine bar. When that decision was made, we're talking about nearly 10 or 12 weeks ago. So at that point in time, none of us knew what was going to happen when restaurants were allowed to reopen. Would locals just stay at home? Would their kind of consumer behavior have shifted? Would they be uncertain or unsure about going back out again? And, being within relatively close confines amongst other people that they didn't know. Would they want to save their money? Honestly, we had no sense of what we were facing on the other side. So that was very much part of our consideration. The other was, Noma is whilst I've always said it's the antithesis of fine dining, it is fine dining. It is that, and it is at a luxury premium price point that is attainable to only a certain amount of people. We acknowledge that. And I think our thinking, Renee's thinking, was, whilst Denmark hadn't been affected by it as perhaps as in the same way as other countries had, did we want to go back to doing, at least straight away anyway, doing what we had always done? Did we want to have 110 guests doing a tasting menu of 13, 14 courses or servings over a 3-hour period? Did that feel right? Did it feel appropriate for our guests, for our team? And ultimately, I remember him saying, he kept saying this image of, I want to throw the doors open and I want to let the community back, and I want to give them a place to come back and heal, to celebrate community in a way of togetherness. I want to give Danes a chance to connect or reconnect with Noma. And I want to do something that is democratic and accessible to everyone. And what's more democratic than a hamburger and a glass of wine? And that's what we did. And we did that at a time. So we opened that maybe 3 or 4 days after restaurants were allowed to reopen. It was, I think, beyond what we could have imagined in terms of sheer volume, just seeing people come back out again. And the positivity that it brought, not only within the community, but our team as well. And to be honest, that positivity is something that we've seen across the board in other places that we're involved in, but just generally around town is, in the restaurants that I've dined at since we were allowed to reopen. Of course, people are not perhaps as closely packed in as they used to be. Social distancing and the other restrictions that have been put in place are, of course, being followed and respected. But what we're seeing is, I keep saying this word, is hope, is, and a joy of kind of that, the joy of hope for what may come. I observe tables and I see guests who are happy to be dining, who are not looking over their shoulder or kind of looking at other tables anxiously thinking, are you a carrier or are you going to make me sick? I think there's just this celebration. I mean, of course, it sits at the back of all of our minds, personally, professionally, of what, the what if. And, to Richard's point, we're all making this up as we go along, because ultimately this is being driven by something that none of us can control at the moment. We all hope for a vaccine. We all hope for therapeutic treatments that will come. But ultimately, we're all just doing the best that we can with the cards that we've all been dealt. And, it would appear that Singapore and Denmark have perhaps been dealt, touch wood, some better cards at the moment. But hopefully, India and the US won't be too far behind.
I want to touch a bit on the idea of hope. And as leaders, I mean, in the roles that you four have, you are directly responsible for setting the corporate cultures in your organizations. And it must be very tough to sort of maintain a hopeful, sort of positive corporate culture in this period. I mean, what are some of the things that you're doing in your own organizations to keep motivated yourself and to keep your teams motivated? Let's start with Karina. I think she wants to answer first.
I can go. I was like, so we have actually been, I think we've just been there, honestly, for each other in the truest sense, in terms of whether when we kind of shut down and when we had to keep, it was really important for us to keep in touch with each other. So whether it was like the weekly Zoom calls or coming back with different ideas, I mean, I think we must have gone through at least 100 ideas. 70% of them got scrapped like a few days before we started because we had to keep changing, keep pivoting, but just being in touch with everyone, bouncing off things, working with them. Even when we started Deliveries, I mean, I really think we had to come together to do things that we have never done before. We had servers and managers like doubling up as delivery boys to like send stuff out, or we had like teams from our supply chain coming in and helping us with inventories, and just really understanding that we have to be there for each other. And I think another thing that we really learned is that we can be a lot more self-sufficient than we normally are in day to day, and we don't have to depend on a lot of the third parties or aggregators, as I mentioned even before. I think that is truly amazing. That was very motivating. I think the second thing would also be our guests. We got numerous calls saying that, we can't wait to be back, or if you were to start delivery, please let us know. We would love to order from you. And that's amazing, right? Because at the end of the day, I think you really have to be supremely passionate to be in this industry, because there's a lot of the days it can be either it's the costs that are too heavy, or you have to kind of keep going back and reinventing. And every day it's like a seat not sold is basically just like you missing out on that opportunity, and ensuring that the guests keep coming back to you and you have repeat business is so important. So having that loyalty and love back from your guests, I think is extremely motivating.
Richard, let's hear from you.
Well, there are a couple things. I first want to just note that, although we are we're all separated geographically and culturally with different business models, it's amazing to see how similar we are, which is, sometimes when the conditions are at the worst, you see the best of what our industry can do. And I've just on this call, I've been impressed with just my other panelists going, okay, well, here's what we were presented with. What are we going to do now? And I go back to the batch cocktails in the cryovac bag. I mean, if you go back a couple of years, somebody in my organization would say, I'm never going to batch cocktails in it. But here we are in that place now, or we're going to have delivery, with people from our own team to cut out the third party so we can control the experience for the guest. Or how can we bring people out of their houses with, being a lighthouse literally for our community? Well, I'm a world-renowned chef, but I'll make a hamburger because that'll put a smile on everybody's face. But, if Ben and I would have talked 5 years ago and I would have said, when you open in your burger bar, he'd say that's unfortunately not on the list. And I'm not speaking for Ben, but what I just keep coming back to is the athleticism of the people in this industry to overcome, circumstances that they could have never dreamed. I go back to 9/11 and I said, well, this is about as bad as we'll ever face in the industry or in the country. But here we are now with something that's, quite honestly more difficult to manage, because if I go back to 9/11, the one thing that put people, on pause was fear and safety. I'm afraid of what might happen next. And once that fear dissipated, it got back to normal. But right now, we're still trying to crawl before we can walk. But while that's happening, I just know that, especially with people on this call, you're all sitting in some room or on a Zoom call somewhere dreaming up what could work. And I just find that to be completely motivating for me, because, again, sometimes when conditions get the worst in our industry, you see the best ideas or the best things happen. And I just want to honor the fact that you three are representative of the best part of why I chose to get in the industry, which is we don't take no for an answer. We figure things out. And athletes, good athletes, great athletes, of which you all are, and our industry is, figure out a way to win the gold medal. They don't stop. And I just want to say what a motivating thing it is just to hear what's going on, because somewhere in there, there's another good idea that's going to move your business forward. But, bravo to you all.
I think, and of course, mate, thank you. It's very kind of you to say that. I think
although
the
you
word
may have
that
said a burger bar was in the offing 5 years ago. I just never asked you.
It definitely wasn't, but I think that's the thing. I think we as an industry, and it's perhaps easy to say this where we are at the moment. We are not, of course we're still in the weeds, but perhaps we're not as deep in them as others are in other places around the world. And so we don't take that for granted. But I remember having a conversation with Renee weeks ago. We're sitting in the garden at Noma, and he said, I don't know if I want us to go back to what it was that we were doing. And I said, well, only we can change that, because again, I think as Noma, perhaps we're afforded opportunities, but I said, if we go back to what it is that we were doing, our guests will come back. So it's ultimately up to you. It's up to us to decide what it is we want to be and what it is that we want to stand for on the other side of this. And I think the word I often keep coming back to is permission, is that we as an industry have, because of this, been given permission, and I hope we're all giving ourselves permission to think about things that maybe we would never have done 5 years ago, or things that we would never have even done a year ago as well, where we would have dismissed it out of hand of, no, that's not who we are, or that doesn't fit the strategy,
exactly,
or that's not
what I was saying
of our standing would ever do. And I think, I hope the silver lining that comes from this is that we've all been given permission to explore things. I think in many ways we've all looked into the precipice and seen how shaky this industry is. We've all known that. That's, as I think Karina said, you don't get into this business purely on a financial basis. You get in for that sense of hospitality and community, both within and outside of our teams that we all love. But, we've all looked at what is possible when circumstances like this arise. I don't think any of us want to find ourselves in circumstances like this again. And so I think we've been given permission to explore other avenues, to diversify. Of course, everything we do has to still have the same integrity and the values that that we have all stood for in our businesses for as many years as we have, because our guests, our audience will see right through it if we veer away from those values. But if we're true to that, if we're true to our integrity, I think we've been all given permission to think differently and to behave differently. And that's a good thing too.
Yeah, it's funny that, if I can add on that, Ben, but you mentioned about values. I think company culture is not something you build overnight. You can only build on it. But we have one of our company values, which is to act on it first. And this is the mantra that really was put to the test during this lockdown. And we really leaned on our team, and I think everybody felt unleashed, perhaps beyond permission. Like, now it's just no idea is a bad idea. Just act on it.
Agree.
We went from never doing delivery to setting up our own e-commerce website and pretty much trying to learn what it's like to run an e-commerce company overnight, how to do logistics. And oh my God, like the delivery of food is so difficult. There's so many moving parts. The thing doesn't stay on its place. It loses temperature. And if you, God forbid, if you miss out one item and you have to send, one of the item later and somebody missed their meal as the result, that's a disaster. we had to figure this out on the fly. But the team really took on that mantra, act on it first, and just do it. No idea is a bad idea. But I'll tell you where it gets tough when in this new, or at least during that period of lockdown with the delivery model, was our team are so motivated by interaction with guests, by seeing straight away, are people having fun at the table? Are they smiling? Are they enjoying the food and the drinks? But we don't get that interaction anymore. We were driver coordinator. We are, website technicians. And when we hear back from our customers, it's usually, where's my food? I've been waiting for 20 minutes and it haven't arrived, or you missed out one item there. So in the beginning, it was really challenging for the team to not get this feedback loop, and that all they get were the complaints. But I think we keep saying, we have to find a way to deliver wow to our guests, even when they're home, right? Or even when they call you to complain, we have to find a way to make that interaction fun. One of the books I used to read is by Tony Xie, Delivering Happiness at Zappos, and how they're well renowned about their call centers, and that can become a source of hospitality. So that was one of the more challenging part. The good part was everybody was acting fast and acting quick. Things that used to take months to plan were suddenly done in 3 days. But yeah, we had to deal with, oh man, like we get so many customer complaints today or things like that, just because, we missed it by 10 minutes. Yeah, so some good, some bad.
On that note, do you think that customers really understand what the F&B industry is going through, and what can customers do better to actually help restaurants as we move forward and as we reemerge, as people go back to restaurants or people continue to order in? What can the consumers do better to help you?
I think, if I may start, I think most customers understand the challenge, that this is challenging time for everybody, and especially so for F&B. And I think when they lost their temper, it's not because they mean to, but they're going through some tough times too. They're worried. They can't go out. Maybe they have a child at home, and they're not able to bring the kid out to the park and have him run around and things like that. So I think solidarity and just understanding the difficulty that people are going for it's a two-way street. We ask our customers to be understanding, and we ask our team, hey, you got to put yourselves in the customer's shoes, right? They're facing some tough times. But I think as long as we are transparent and we try to put ourselves in other people's shoes, that we are on their side. I think Danny Mayer used that phrase before, that we are on the customer side. That when we do that, customers understand that, okay, these guys are facing a tough time. I'm sorry, I was out of line. Maybe we can't give them a hug anymore, but maybe we can give them a virtual hug and says, I hear you. We are going to feed you. We're going to get that food over to you, plus some more. And I think that goes a long way. Just conveying that sense that I understand that you're having a difficult time, and we will help you.
Richard, you mentioned that just a couple of days ago you had you drafted a plan for dining at 50%. Ben, I know that you guys are about to reopen the restaurant. So as you are all drafting plans to reopen, to invite customers back into your dining rooms, what's going to change? What about dining 6 months ago will have changed radically as people re-enter dining rooms in the next few months?
Ben, you're closer to opening.
Obviously there's the very practical. As I said, we're partners with a handful of restaurants with some of our former team, and I think, we are, we'll be constantly evolving, one, just in terms of our guest demand, obviously. That's just purely from a very operational perspective. Some of the businesses that we're involved in opened a month ago, 4 days. They're about to go to 7. That's positive. There's the very, tactical approach of shifting our type of, or the operations of those restaurants to reflect some of the guidelines and the restrictions that have been put in place. That will have, a very kind of tactical effect. But I think from our standpoint, the fundamentals of who we are as Noma, but also as Sanchez or as Bar or as, 108, they will not change. I think to Indra's point, we pride ourselves on hospitality. We pride ourselves on creative excellence. We acknowledge, we don't take for granted the experiences that our guests are having in their own lives. The fact that they have chosen, especially in these challenging times, to visit us, to spend their money. And that I think, if anything, we'll just be pushing harder at the moment that they step through those doors, that it is that 2-3 hour period of solace that hopefully that we can give them. We can give them an experience that allows them to put aside perhaps what it was that may have challenged them during that day or week, or the concerns that may be sitting in the back of their mind. The reality is, though, I don't think any of us on this call, I don't think that changes. Maybe we just try a little harder because we acknowledge, to Indra's point, that everybody, it's not just our industry, everybody is facing their own levels of concern or uncertainty, and it's what we do. It's what I think our teams love to do. I describe our Noma team as, racehorses in the gate. They're just waiting for the barrier to lift and to run again. They just are. Yes, we've just had this extraordinary 5-week burger and wine bar pop-up, which I truly believe was as important for them as it was our guests, because, as you say, this is what they love doing. They couldn't give a handshake or a hug, but they could give and they could receive a smile. But as we reopen Noma, it's reopening and allowing that team to do what it is that they do best. And, of course, we will be monitoring what happens, financially as it relates to guest numbers. As we look to the next 3 months, we're in a good shape in terms of capacity. Beyond that, as we reopen our next season, which will be in the fall, let's see. But, I think everybody on this call is just going to be giving it the best shot they can. And, being as nimble as we can to move with the ever-changing dynamics.
And, I'll say that some of the things that we're looking at in terms of what will change, obviously, the space between tables will change. We've in any model we've run, we've constricted the menu offerings for a number of reasons. Number one, less staff to produce it, much easier to order and stock product and things like that. And the actual delivery of the menu is something we're looking at right now. That could be as simple as a chalkboard that doesn't change hands. And we're trying to minimize the changing of hands, both from get up and go payment to how you book your reservation to how the menu is delivered. All things like that are paramount in what we do. How we book the restaurant, we've run models of maybe we do 3 seatings so we could control things. Maybe you pre-order your dinner when you make the reservations. We're running a number of different variables to see what we can do to be safe, but also to make sure that it feels like a Danny Meyer business. And like Ben said, a smile is universal unless you have a face mask over it. And so once you put the face mask on, then we have to figure out how we give you that hug without giving you a literal hug. And so what's pretty amazing is we've got some smart people in the company tackling all those things. But behind that, it's okay, if you're a server, you have to wash your hands every 30 minutes and you got to make sure that you sign a log so all these, what my partner Danny would call, you see the swan up on top of the water doing this, but underneath the swan's doing this. All this is happening right now so we can continue to be that to our guests.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're doing the same thing on that front. Again, we are, as Noma, we're somewhat fortunate given the literal dimensions of the dining room has not meant that we've had to change the seating plan too dramatically.
Yeah.
We don't have a menu. It is a set menu.
Yeah.
Those things, it is, I think we'll all, be contributing to, I think when, Karina talks about the GDP percentage of the food and hospitality industry, I think what we're going to be contributing to the hand sanitizing industry and its percentage of our economy's moving forward is extraordinary because it is sanitize. But, we, interestingly, to Richard's point, simplifying things, for the first 3 months of Noma, we are pausing our kind of approach, which has been for the last 2 years, 3 distinct seasons and 3 distinct menus, and creating a menu that will draw from, the previous 2 years. That's as much to give our team a chance to restart the engine, to restart creatively, to kind of deliver as much efficiencies as we can, because look, the reality is a burger bar is one thing. The moment we reopen the doors to the restaurant as it's known, there are going to be things that we're going to experience that we haven't seen before. And it's about trying to create for the team as much clear space as they can. And of course, giving our guests not only the smile, but the comfort. I think fortunately for us, and this was a very conscious decision, was as we reopen our doors next Thursday, restaurants in Denmark will have been open for close to 2 months. Guests will have had some sense of what to expect on the other side. It's not us on the front line, in a sense, trying to reestablish or re-educate, what that experience should be. Many of them will have dined out already. And that was a conscious decision of ours of, let's not be first. Let's let the market emerge. Let's let guests feel more comfortable. Let's see how these new restrictions, and again, they're not as onerous as perhaps they are in other markets. Let's see how businesses respond to that. Let's see how guests respond to that, so that when we do reopen, we come out as strong as we can.
Karina?
So I would say that I honestly completely echo what Ben and Richard just said in terms of like the safety and hygiene protocols that we need to follow. I think we actually have restaurants in 3 different states in India, and we've reopened in the south and in the east. And what we have seen is that with the limited capacity that we're able to operate with, we've seen a lot of our regular customers come back in to dine with us, and that's been really amazing. So I think we've had customers of groups of 2, and we've had a lot of couples and a couple of friends come in, and we've done kind of everything also that Richard mentioned in terms of we have QR codes for menus, and we're doing social distancing and all of that. And I think it's just something that we have to keep evaluating on a day-to-day basis and see what we want to do. I mean, for once, we've just started like an omakase menu as well. So you have the opportunity to just like experience the entire restaurant. You understand the guest likes and dislikes. And they also, like, especially with our regular guests, I think what we see is very often they come and they order the same things. And this way they actually get to experience a different side of the restaurant. And that's been great. But I think overall, we just have to kind of take it a day at a time, because unfortunately, even though we have opened in the south, we opened to time restrictions in terms of we could keep the restaurant open till 9 p.m. and now we've actually gone back to 6 p.m. because they saw cases rise. So it's just pivoting on a daily basis and just doing what's right, both in terms of the community and also our business, because eventually we do want to get out of this. So it doesn't help if, we try to just kind of pack up the restaurants right now and then have to go back as we did.
Can I ask Karina a question? I'm just curious because I think Indra and Richard and we are fortunate, so to speak, to operate restaurants. I think, Richard, maybe you've got DC, but by and large, we're operating restaurants in single cities, single states. You're operating across, as you say, 3 states.
Yes.
Are you facing different guidelines, different restrictions, different rules by state, or is it kind of coming from a federal or national level and so you've got consistency across all of your locations?
No, actually, what the government has done is they have opened up the cities or states-wise depending on how intense it is, right? So if there are a lot of cases in a certain state, so for example, Maharashtra and Mumbai is one of the highest states with cases. So while that's our primary business and primary state where we have most of our restaurants, we've not been able to open over there. Whereas in Calcutta, we have reopened, but we have a curfew up until 8 p.m. And as I mentioned, in Bangalore, we were actually open until 9 p.m. And then when they saw the cases rise, they had to go back. So that's what the government's done, which I think is the most logical move because, it's unfair to kind of keep another state waiting if it's not as bad and just open it up phase-wise. But in terms of the SOPs and the rules that you follow, that's pretty consistent throughout F&B overall.
That's good.
Yeah.
Cool. I know we're running out of time, so I'm gonna ask Indra to make some final comments on changes he sees to the F&B sector as reopening is happening, and then we will let you guys get on with your day.
Could I ask Indra a question when he's done?
Of course. Yes, of course.
Okay.
Sorry, can you repeat your question? I didn't quite catch that.
Well, just as a follow-up of, some of the changes that you see in the F&B sector, changes that you have to make as you reopen.
I think there are 2 changes we make. The first one is short term. That picture that Richard painted about the swan looking beautiful up on top of the water, we are actually now letting customers show below the surface, and we are making
True.
it painfully obvious that we are taking safety and making you comfortable seriously. We have signs that we made to say that do not sit here for social distancing purposes. And instead of making it beautiful or making it blend in with the interior design, we actually made it look like a red stop sign that you would, in the shape of a stop sign on the street, because people are accustomed to that. And I think that the result that we want from that is, like what Ben mentioned earlier, that they can sit down and not have to keep looking over their shoulder and being worried. We all know the risks are there. Everybody knows that, but they feel a little bit more comforted. So in the short term, that's our focus. But similarly, we've also shortened our menu and all that. But the reason we do that is we feel that the reason why people are going to come back to the restaurants might be different going forward than they used to in the past. I think a lot of time in the past, when they come to a restaurant, they want to have a full-on experience. They want to try food and drinks, ingredients they have never felt, or authenticity. In terms of provenance of food and bartenders and all that. But I think going forward, it's going to be less about experience, in my opinion, and more about human relationship. I like to coin the word relationship economy, that people are going to be spending money on things that enrich their human relationships. I want to go out to meet my friends that I haven't physically met. I can't do another Zoom birthday party, right? I'm done with that. I would rather go, even if there is a limitation, I can only meet with 4 people, then I'll rather have my birthday party or celebrate my friend's birthday with just 4 people. And we know that's the reason they come to the restaurant. So we want our restaurant to become a place where we play a role in that human relationships. And it's less about me, it's less about the food or the drinks that, the latest development I'm making. It's just about making you now feel comfortable and then connect with your friends. And the good thing is I think that's the tenet of hospitality, so that's not going to change. And later on, when people are ready, we can always bring back a lot more of the experiential factors around it.
Could not agree more. And, I think whether it's a burger or whatever, great restaurants are for their community first. They're magnets for their community. They also serve food to go along with it. But Indra, the question I have for you is, what do you see as the short to longer term view for bars? Because we've made a decent business on full bars that are sometimes, and I'm knocking on wood now, 3 deep with people talking to a bartender all sitting next to each other. Obviously, that's not a short-term thing, but that's one of the reasons people would go to bars, for that sort of tight community and that experience with the person in front of them mixing. What do you see coming? What's upstream for bars?
Well, I think on our side, Jigger and Pony has always been a cocktail bar, and the way we run our cocktail bar, it's a lot like restaurants. It's table seating only. You can sit at the bar counter, yes, but with assigned seatings. There are some standing tables, but we're not necessarily encouraging that or allocating a space for that. The menus are provided to you at a table. You place your order through your server, and then the drinks will be brought to you and explained to you. In a way, a lot like full service dining. And I think people still want to have a good time in a bar and have that social experience, but it's just less about, an outwardly social experience of meeting a stranger, or if we just won the Champions League or something like that, like it's a big celebration with everybody in the bar. That may have to wait for a while. But I think celebrations that is within your group, just like you would in a restaurant, or experiences, discovering flavors within your group, I think then the bar is very much like a restaurant. And I learn a lot from all of your restaurants and trying to learn more about what else can we do in bars to move in that direction. Mm-hmm. So I think we're going to be more alike than different in that sense.
If not, I'm going to thank you all very, very much. I'm going to leave one last idea, which I'm sure people who are watching are thinking, which is sort of, Noma Burger Shake Shack. I had to say it. But I want to thank you all very much. Karina, Indra, Ben, Richard, thank you so much for being my guest on this panel. Thank you all for watching, and hopefully you'll turn in for another Tripadvisor Talk in the near future. Thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you guys.